Hey everyone, this is going to be a video about the symbolism of the big spot, and I actually did this video a couple of years ago, but I used live action footage in it, and because of that YouTube banned it and basically won't let anyone watch it. So I'm going to redo it. I was originally just going to rip the audio and do new visual stuff with the same audio, but when I went and listened to it, I realized that we have learned a lot more since I made that video, so I just decided to redo the whole thing. For one thing, I kept calling the CRM the helicopter group in the last video, which means we didn't know what they were called yet when I made that video. All right, so we're just going to go into the big spot and everything that is foreshadowed in the big spot, because it is a big foreshadow, and I actually think it's super cool, the kind of stuff that we see there. Okay, so we're going to start with Daryl and the group loading the car so they can go to the big spot. We see Daryl put a red gas can in the back. Gasoline and gas stations are a big symbol that we've seen a lot, but then there's also the fact that it's red. We see a lot of red items, and there's a lot of different interpretations of them, but for now, let's just say that it's an important symbol. This is also where Beth and Zach say goodbye, and we hear Daryl's famous "damn romance" line. A couple of things about this. Because of a symbol I'm going to get to in just a minute, I really think that the big spot represents Grady very specifically, and that means that in this case, Beth and Zach can be seen as proxies of Beth and Daryl. Think about it this way. Zach is going to the big spot, which represents going to Grady, and they don't get to say goodbye, and while there, Zach is killed. Now, when Beth goes to Grady and is apparently shot, she and Daryl really don't get a good goodbye, and he believes that she is killed. So they are actually kind of a proxy couple for Beth and Daryl, and the big spot is a proxy place for Grady. And that's why it's so important that Daryl makes the damn romance novel reference. Not only is it showing that Zach and Beth are a proxy for him and Beth, but it also shows, as many people have said before me, that it will eventually have a happy ending, because romance novels always have a happy ending rather than a tragic one. Next, we get to the symbol that makes me think that this has to do with Grady. As they're putting crates in the back of the car, we see a white cross on them. So these are black crates with a white cross, which is exactly what the Grady cars have on them. And that shows that this is a foreshadow of Beth going to Grady. Next, we hear Bob talking to Sasha about how he wants to earn his keep. That is yet another example of how this is a foreshadow of Grady. He talks about how he basically wants to pay for the resources that the group is spending on him. He's had a week of meals and a roof over his head, and he wants to contribute now. And that's just something that is talked about very heavily at Grady, okay? It's a major theme that Dawn mentions to Beth quite a lot. We also have the fact that Bob was a medic in the Army, so we have a medical theme going on here, which again is reminiscent of Grady. Okay, let's fast forward to when they actually get to the big spot. Out in the parking lot, there are Army tents full of medical supplies. And of course, that's not shocking, because this was obviously something that was set up as sort of an Army medical unit, or a MASH unit perhaps. So of course, there's going to be medical supplies there. But again, this is a major foreshadow of Grady. We see a lot of IV stands and IVs, and that is specifically reminiscent of when Beth woke up and she had an IV in her arm. But again, we just have the medical theme going on. Not to mention, there were specifically green Army tents in the parking lot of Grady. Okay, so they're very purposefully and specifically showing that this is a proxy of Grady. We also have the fact that Daryl used music to lead the walkers away. Now, this is where things get really interesting. We've seen them use music to lead walkers away in other cases. The first one that comes to mind is the wolves in season 6, and I believe that the wolves are also a proxy of the CRM. So the point is, we see this over and over again, this kind of symbolism around villain groups. And again, this just shows that it's a proxy. Now, not only does this represent Beth going to Grady, but I also believe that this is a foreshadow of the CRM, okay? Just like the wolves are a foreshadow of the CRM. So there's going to be something to do with music and leading walkers away in the CRM storyline. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but it will be there. Another thing that we have just figured out in the last year or so is that we see an American flag. And again, this isn't totally shocking given that this is an army camp, but the American flag suggests the Revolutionary War theme, which we've seen a lot of, okay? And we believe that they're using that to foreshadow a war between the CRM and, Team Family, Rick's group. So to have it here and to have the camera focus on it shows that this is a foreshadow of some major conflict or war that Team Family is going to have with this group, which again, I believe is the CRM. So a lot of symbolism going on here. So then we get to the part where Daryl and Michonne and Zach are standing outside the building, and Zach is trying to guess what Daryl did before the turn. And of course, he guesses homicide detective. Now here's the thing. It took a long time for us to figure out what this pointed to, and I still don't think we have it in its entirety, but we have a much better idea now. Couple of things. Very recently, at the Commonwealth, we had Eugene searching for Stephanie, but whose name actually we learned is Max. But we had the fake Stephanie who was pretending to be her, and they had a real noir detective thing going on with Eugene, okay? And I believe that the scene where Zach suggests that Daryl was a homicide detective connects to that symbolism. I believe the detective stuff has to do with Daryl figuring out where Beth is, okay? So I'll come back to that, but I noticed rewatching it this time that after laughing and they all talk, and then Michonne says, "Are you ready to do this, detective?" And she's talking to Daryl, and Daryl says, "Yeah, let's do it," and then they go in. So think of it this way. If the big spot represents Grady, then she called him detective just before they entered Grady. So again, I think it just shows that he will figure out where Beth is. He's the one who figured out where she was at Grady, but I think it's also a longer term foreshadow than that. He's going to figure out where she is in the CRM, and he's going to be the one to go in and get her. Okay, so I just think it's a foreshadow of that, and that he's going to need some serious detective skills, because there's going to be a lot of weirdness and misdirection and strange things going on, just like there was with Eugene. I mean, he was having a hard time figuring out what exactly was going on and how people were tricking him, and it's going to be very similar with Daryl, although probably on a much bigger scale. And that's probably where the detective symbolism comes in. So we haven't seen it be fulfilled entirely yet, except in season 5 where he figured out where Beth was. Then we see Bob look down at a pair of legs. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this, except that it shows another way in which they have foreshadowed something that has already been fulfilled. This is a very obvious foreshadow of him losing his leg to the termites in season 5. We might also be able to connect it to the lost foot or shoe symbolism, but more directly, it's about Bob losing a leg. So it's really kind of haunting to have him look down at those legs and know what his fate ends up being. The camera then pans up to a helicopter that has crashed on the roof, and we also notice that there are walkers up there and that the roof is very rotted out, probably due to water or perhaps blood from the walkers. It's not entirely clear, but there are definitely patches of the roof that are completely rotted. Then we head inside, and there are a few other small foreshadows that I wanted to point out. Again, much like with Bob's legs, they don't have to do a whole lot with Beth, but it shows the ways in which they foreshadow things. So the first is Glenn looking at baby pictures. Now, at the beginning of this episode, we saw Glenn and Maggie waking up together, and he told her he didn't want her to go, and we didn't understand why. They didn't tell us why. When he gets back, she tells him that she's not actually pregnant, but they thought she was. So they're just foreshadowing what's going to happen there. And of course, this is a foreshadow of season 6 when she finds out that she is pregnant for real. And Glenn then leaves to go on Operation Lead the Walkers Away without her. And that's when his death fake out happens. Okay. Here, we don't really have a death fake out for Glenn, but it's a very dangerous situation where he's fighting walkers and very easily could have died. So it's a foreshadow of that. We also have Michonne running into a cardboard cutout of a quote-unquote monster, and she slices it in half. I think this foreshadows a couple of her arcs. There's, first of all, when she talks to Carl in 416 about how she's just another monster too, and it kind of foreshadows that whole thing and her kind of internal struggles with the apathy she falls into when she's lost something and kind of staying human. But I actually think that they have a whole other arc for Michonne in mind when it comes to this. More recently, we saw her getting up in the middle of the night and killing walkers, and they have something about her and Negan's bat. She keeps picking up Negan's bat and looking at it. And then, of course, right before she disappeared with Virgil last season, she had a hallucination where she actually was one of Negan's people, and Rick and Daryl killed her. So I'm not really sure where that's leading, but I can tell that they have some whole arc worked out for Michonne that's going to have to deal with all of this, and we just haven't actually seen it yet. I'm assuming we'll probably see it in the Rick Grimes films, but I honestly think that this little tiny bit in the big spot was also foreshadowing that major arc for her. Okay, so these things have been foreshadowed for a long time, and Gimple has been planning them for a long time. All right, so then Bob stops at the shelf of alcohol, and of course, the shelf falls. Now, this is super, super important, guys. Look at the sequence. The shelf falls and creates a lot of noise when it falls, okay? Because all the glass breaks, and then it falls on him, and he shouts, and it just creates a lot of noise. And that is heard from the roof and brings the walkers toward the noise. Now, that wouldn't have been a big deal because they were up on the roof, and, you know, they wouldn't have been able to really hurt anyone inside, except that the roof was rotted out. And so because of that, they started falling through the roof. Now, why is this important? Oh, so many ways. Okay. This is not something that we can prove yet, but me and my fellow theorists, we honestly believe that Beth and Daryl burning down the Moonshine Shack is what put them on the CRM's radar, or perhaps on the Grady cops' radar. We think there were people out there, maybe just the Grady cops, looking to bring people in. And remember that in season 4, it showed the smoke from the house in other storylines, okay? Like we saw it with Carol and Leslie and Mika, and they talked about it. And they didn't know that it was a fire that Beth and Daryl had started, but they could see it. So other people could see it. So if somebody followed them to the funeral home and all of that was a trap, which I totally believe that it was, there's just no way it couldn't have been. It was too weird and there was too many things that were unexplained about it. Then probably them burning down the Moonshine Shack is what put them on the Grady cops' radar and kind of set the whole thing in motion. So now look back at the sequence. So then we have Bob finding alcohol. And him approaching the alcohol at all is what ends up bringing the walkers through the roof and eventually bringing the helicopter through the roof. Now, let me unpack that a little bit more. Because Rick disappeared on the helicopter and because we know the CRM flies around in black helicopters, the helicopter definitely represents the CRM, okay? If the big spot represents Grady and the CRM is on the roof, it kind of represents that they are a part of Grady, they are linked to Grady, and that somehow they're going to come through Grady, okay? So you could say that Bob, interacting with the alcohol bottles as he did is what brought the CRM through the roof and to Daryl's group. And that is a foreshadow of Beth and Daryl messing around with alcohol, which led to burning the Moonshine Shack and bringing the CRM to them in a really bad way. Now, the other thing is that we have a walker falling through the roof. And I've talked about this. I talked about it just in the last couple of videos about the death fake-out patterns. Anyone, whether it's a walker or a human, falling through a floor or a ceiling, it represents them breaking the plane or falling into the realm of the dead. Okay, so where they are is the realm of the living, where they fall into is the realm of the dead. So we have this walker doing this, and I believe that that represents Beth being shot, okay? Because something about Grady makes it so that she, much like Ezekiel, fell into the realm of the dead, but she didn't stay there. She, it seems like she died, but she actually lived. But that is what it's a representation of. And that happens right before the helicopter falls through. So it's kind of like Grady is the big spot. Then we have someone, almost dying or who should have died but didn't. And then we have the helicopter, which represents the CRM falling through and crashing through. Okay, this is a huge foreshadow of the overall arc that Gimple was setting up here. We also have the fact that Daryl was standing on a pyramid of alcohol, and it's actually really haunting when he's standing there and looking up at the helicopter. He's watching it slowly descend and kind of fall through the roof and realizing this is a really bad thing. But from a realistic perspective, it's odd that he stayed there as long as he did. I mean, if you see a helicopter, which is huge and heavy, and if it crashes on top of you, it's going to kill you. I mean, wouldn't you get out of the way? But they have him sit there and stare at it. And it's almost like he can't believe it, or he's really haunted by it or something. And I think that represents that the helicopter, the CRM, are going to crash into Daryl's world in a big way and in a very tragic way that's really going to kind of shake him to his core. And of course they do, because it's all about Beth getting shot and him losing her. The other thing is that just as the helicopter is crashing through, we have Zach being bitten. And remember I said at the beginning that Zach and Beth were a proxy of Daryl and Beth, okay? But they're kind of, the roles are flip-flopped, because in this case, Beth stayed at the prison, and it was Zach who went with Daryl into the big spot. So in this case, Zach is actually kind of a proxy of Beth, because he's the one that gets killed in the place that represents the big spot. Okay, so I get that this is a lot. There's a lot going on, but it all lines up perfectly with what happened and with the symbolism that they use to show the different arcs. Okay, now the next thing to talk about is Bob is still caught under the shelf, right? And actually, this is before Zach is bitten. When the shelf falls on him, his foot gets caught, which is interesting because he can't go anywhere. So that is representative of imprisonment or being trapped. And Tyrese says something really interesting to him. They run over to see if he's okay, and he makes up the story about how he took the corner too fast and accidentally hit the shelf. And, you know, that's not actually true. He just didn't want them to know that he was thinking about taking the alcohol and hiding it, because we learn later on in the season that he's an alcoholic. But Tyrese says, wow, you really lucked out. If this thing had come down on you the wrong way, and then he just sort of trails off. And I honestly think that is a foreshadow of the fact that Beth is lucky to have lived, okay? Like, she very easily could have died and should have died, but this is where the luck theory comes from, okay? It means the way that they use it in the show is that someone is lucky to still be alive or to still be surviving, because by all logic, they shouldn't have, okay? So Tyrese says this here, and it's just a foreshadow of Beth having luck and surviving her gunshot. Then we have a walker that kind of crawls toward Bob before they get him out. This walker has a huge head wound right in the left side of his forehead, and clearly this wound did not kill the walker, right? Somebody probably hacked it on the head and was trying to hit its brain and kill it, but it didn't work. So it's got this gaping wound, but it's still alive and animated. So, whoever tried to kill it just didn't go deep enough in the brain. But again, I think that is a foreshadow of a head wound that hits the brain but doesn't kill, which is what happened with Beth, we believe. This same walker is almost missing a foot. Its foot is just like hanging on by a thread, super gross, and dragging behind it. And that is some of the lost foot and leg symbolism, which we always see in sequences where they are foreshadowing the death fake out. So again, this is just more of the same symbolism over and over and again about this death fake out. When Bob is trying to push this walker away, he actually grabs its scalp and starts sort of peeling it back. And that's like a really weird thing to do. Like, why would you do that? I think they're trying to pass it off as him trying to push the walker away, but that's not what he's actually doing. He's peeling the scalp back so you can see the brain. And again, I just think that's another hint about the brain. It's trying to show something about the brain being injured, but it not being a mortal wound. Okay, so it's just more hints about Beth surviving. During the sequence, we see a couple of other things as more and more walkers fall through the roof, and the different members of the group fight them. At one point, we see Glenn beat a walker in the head with a gun, and it occurred to me that that could be a foreshadow of Negan, because he shoots one walker, and it could be that he's out of bullets or something. We don't really know, but we don't actually see him try to kill this walker with the gun or with a knife. He just beats it on the head. And so I wondered if that was a foreshadow of Negan beating Glenn and how he died. Then we have a blonde female walker who we always associate with Beth, and Tyrese shoots her in the head. And you really have to slow it down. It's hard to get a still shot of this, but when he shoots her in the left side of the forehead, which is exactly where Beth was shot. So that's just another hint. And then we have Sasha stabbing a walker up and through the eye. And again, that isn't specifically related to what happened to Beth at Grady, although we have conjectured a few times over the years that she could have eye problems, but it's kind of part of the eye and the Sirius symbolism. Because remember, Sirius is always one-eyed, and that eye tends to be like burning coals, okay? So it's also sort of a way of showing the Sirius or the return symbolism, that what's going on here is a foreshadow of a fake out where somebody's going to disappear for a while and then come back. The final thing I wanted to talk about is that when Daryl finally does drag that walker with the head wound away from Bob, he stomps on its head with his heel. And this is actually exactly what Beth does at Grady when she and Noah are trying to escape. And we would, from a plot perspective, we would say she learned to fight walkers that way from Daryl, which is pretty cool. But the fact that he specifically does that here in the big spot, and then she specifically does it in the parking lot at Grady, show that Grady and the big spot thematically are one and the same. Okay, so the big spot was a foreshadow of Grady. Okay, and then we have Zach dying, which I've already talked about, is a proxy of Beth. And then we have Daryl going to tell Beth about Zach and the famous Bethel hug. So That is pretty much it for the big spot. I just wanted to point out the foreshadows and the way that they use these things as proxies, because they do it all the time. And this was a really important sequence for what was coming. I am going to continue doing some of these for season 4A, because that is when Gimple took over, and just that entire season was like one great big foreshadow of what was coming over the next many seasons. So I'm going to continue to do these and point these out. Tell me in the comments if you think I missed anything or what your favorite part was. Okay,